It's about to go down with Marc and Cathey, a live coaching show about dropping ideas. Marc and Cathey coach and have conversations with brilliant idea creators who are reimagining the world through the expression of their words, thoughts, and action.
Hey everybody, I'm Cathey Armillas.
And I'm Marc Williams. Welcome to It's About to Go Down. And today on It's About to Go Down, we've got the Liz of all Liz's.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
You're welcome. Multifaceted in so many different ways, from working in higher education and public service. She's got a podcast. She's been a part of the Speaker Skills Academy. But here's what I love. Cathey and I love this. Liz, you have defined yourself as an elevated government citizen.
Oh,
I love that. I love it and want to hear more about it. Right? And Liz is here to talk to us about today. We're going to have a great conversation around elevating small voices in public spaces. Ooh. Liz, welcome to It's About to Go Down. Tell us, first of all, what does it mean to be an elevated government citizen? That's one. And two, why is it so important for us to talk about elevating small voices in public spaces?
So much for having me. I'm honored to be on and talking to you formally on your show. You're both wonderful individuals. So happy to be here. Mm-hmm. My story, a bit about me. I am born and raised in New York City. My dad actually worked, I've traveled, I've done a tour of the boroughs over the years. That's like another day. But my dad worked in city government from when I was a child up into his retirement. So spending nearly 30 years working in city government. And in his time working, I had the opportunity to go and work with his colleagues. He actually was a supervisor for a parts shop in downtown Brooklyn, actually under the bridge. And I used to go and hang with his, colleagues, and they had sort of this, and for those who work in civil service and particularly in city government, I mean, I feel like that kind of aura of New York City, I think at its finest, where you had people who were very like family oriented, community driven, that in like the 90s was sort of right, that way of being out in the world, but certainly existed and carried into city service. So I just always had this really great love for my dad, obviously, for his incredible work ethic, my mom too, but it was just, different things that stick with you, those core memories that, endure. It really stuck with me. He was a driver for the mayor at points, for deputy mayors, and I got to see City Hall was a really young woman in New York City, just sparked this thing that later was sort of reactivated later on in my life. But that was sort of my intro to government and the beauty of people who work in government. Fast forward, I actually went into college to be a forensic scientist and wound up changing, right, my path. Started watching The Daily Show my first year in school and college, and fell in love with Jon Stewart and his passion, right, and politics. And at that time, we were like coming out of the war in Iraq. So there was a lot of things around, the spending in government and our priorities and being able to sort of, address these ridiculous costs associated with war and all the frustration with government at that time, right? So it was like Bush era. That was my intro to, I think, being an active citizen. At that time, he seemed like a really, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the he did not have a favorable view, at least for many people right in that circle. And at that time, again, watching Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, that really activated my curiosity in government, in politics, started reading the New York Times, started tracking a little more closely, things that were happening in government, and shifted from a forensic science major to a political science major, and wound up pursuing that. I thought originally I was going to be a high school teacher teaching civics and government because I believed in it so much and was really activated. And, seeing the way that government systems fail us at times, and in that moment, a lot of frustration that people had, And so I thought that was sort of going to be my direction. Fast forward, I wound up getting a fellowship to work in city government. And the rest, as they say, is history. I worked in city government for about 15 years, did a fellowship. So I was a New York City Urban Fellow. Bill de Blasio was an Urban Fellow. We've had lots of commissioners come out of that program. I think the president of John Jay was also an Urban Fellow. So a lot of folks that kind of were cultivated in that group to become, leaders in city government. I had done that sort of fresh out of college, and then worked for the Department of Youth and Community Development for several years, got my master's in public administration, then worked at the Department of Education for several years, which is now New York City Public Schools. So all of that to say, I went from like having this, I think this little seedling that was planted in my dad's experience working in city government, that just time, place, right? Scenario, everything, all those little ingredients came in and triggered me at a certain time in my life that I got really interested, really dedicated and passionate about politics. So, I say I'm now an elevated civil servant or government, I forget what I said, Mark. I'm so sorry.
An elevated government
citizen,
yeah.
right? Elevated government citizen. And I say that because, I have come to realize that when you've worked in government and seen it from that perspective, as so many people probably now who are affected by like our federal changes, you think you know what government is and what politics are as a citizen. There's the things that people allow you to see, want you to see, right? A narrative that's sort of presented and bundled to people. Then you have like the conspiracy on the other side. So it's kind of hard to know the information, but you do have this relationship, right, with politics and with government as an everyday citizen. But when you work in government, I feel like that just changes in such a different way. Like I am, worked in the public school system for several years. So I have 2 kids in the public school system. My experience working in government really shifted, right, the relationships that I have, because I know what happens behind the scenes. I see the struggles that people have. And so that's sort of where it's like, where I feel like when I see changes in the news, I get, sort of activated because I have this context of what happens behind the scenes. So all these layoffs and all this transition and chaos in federal agencies is an example, right? That's something that you see and you feel differently as someone who's worked in government. So in that regard, I say, like, if I'm at picnics, I'm at barbecues, I'm talking to people, I say there's always that lens that you come to it with and a different appreciation you have for how, impactful something is. So someone can say, we're cutting funding at this agency or we're laying off 50 people. But if you know what it's like to already be in an understaffed, under-resourced agency, you start to, again, react to things in a little bit of a different way. So that's where I say I've sort of had that shift in my perspective, because I no longer work in government. I've been in higher education for a couple of years, 3 years now going on almost. And so, even though I don't work for the city government anymore and I'm not in government, I still do care deeply for the people who are left behind and all of the transitions and things that they have to navigate. Because if you follow politics at any level at this point, certainly in New York City, we've had a tumultuous time, which has actually impacted my decision to start this podcast, which maybe we could talk about and we'll talk about in a minute. But, at a federal level, all these places, there's just so much happening. So it's like ripe for ways to elevate and open people's eyes to the impacts of like what these chaotic times, what they do for the people who work in those systems, and like really how it affects you at the end of the day. So however I can spread that message, I do.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, Liz. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, when you're telling me the story about your parents and your dad specifically, like, oh, what a great story to understand what you were exposed to. And it's so funny. I was thinking about kids, and kids are like 50-50 crapshoot, right? You could expose them to something and they go, I hate this thing. My dad does this thing. I could, you know what I mean? It's like a 50-50. And then sometimes you're like, oh, I expose them to something and then they love it and they do it. And just hearing your journey, like I felt so much love in my heart for how much you've served the world in so many different capacities. So thank you. Like I really felt that. I was like, oh, and I know you and I know that you have such a good heart. So like, I even know the intention behind it. So thank you. I am really excited to talk about your podcast, because I think with that as a backdrop, knowing that you want to help elevate other people's voices is pretty exciting. And you're doing a lot of things, Liz. So just to add, hey, I'm just going to start a podcast. So tell us, like, what was that moment that you were like, oh, I need to do a podcast? And tell us how that all came up.
Yeah, totally. So, 2022, I think I was still working in city government. We had a shift in mayoral leadership in New York City. Um, we had Bill de Blasio sort of, served his time, reached his, term limit, and was not able to run for mayor. So certain we were going to have a transition in New York City. And Mayor Adams had taken over, I think this was probably 2021 officially. I was actually initially very excited about the transition because I'll be completely honest, I voted for him, was very enamored in the moment with his maybe like looking a little bit more I don't know how to describe it, pushing for innovation, but also looking to do things in a way of like marrying innovation with like like fiscal responsibility. So I kind of was looking forward to that, like finding it to be like a good balance, like a right balance of leadership. And so at the time when I was working for the Department of Education, now New York City Public Schools, there was excitement of always like this anxiety. There's always anxiety when there's mayoral transitions, and this will be like the third that I had gone through, and one that will come, right? This sort of speaks to people's experiences. There's certainly going to be another one coming up fairly quickly. But I was disappointed, I'll say, with the transition and how it was handled. I, at the time, worked for the Division of Early Childhood Education, which for people, if they're familiar with New York City, pre-K for all, 3K for all. I worked on their operations team, and we were massive. Billions of dollars in budgets. Our division had over 1,600 people across the 5 boroughs. These were just central people supporting all of the programs that were launched around the city. So imagine if you have little ones doing 3K classes, there were providers, contractors, daycares that were getting contracts to provide those services. We had 1,600 people to support all of those programs. So it could be, conducting visits, doing trainings, developing and training on curriculum that was being rolled out to make sure these were high quality. So it was like scale 3K, 4K, and then make it good. So we were a really massive team. So that was shortly over time. We had like new leadership come in. People kind of this initial air of like, we want to hear from you. There was actually a survey that was disseminated to staff. Hey, we want to hear your ideas. What would you like us to prioritize? So like this initial like excitement that we would have, somewhat of a continuation because pre-K, 3K, right, was a huge initiative, but also, maybe have a little bit more stability because it was sort of in this fast-tracked startup kind of space for a very long time. We're like, okay, this is a great initiative. Maybe we'll have some stability. What wound up happening is that was a transition. It's kind of married with the Great Resignation. The city was being adamant that people had to come back to the office in this post-COVID world, which is understandable, but we were also kind of competing with a lot of remote jobs, a lot of employers looking to hire people, and we had a mass sort of exodus of employees. So, we were contending with, new landscape in the job market, more flexibility, and then also just people were feeling like this transition was not necessarily handled well. They were, people were leaving, weren't backfilling positions, and then management, there was just a lot of things that despite all of us who, at least in my experience, we were all eager. There was never like resistance to transition or like, oh, we're holding on to our old folks and the old ways of doing. It's never that. It wasn't handled well, and people were kind of left in a vacuum of information, and people were just leaving, and like decisions were being made without consulting with us. We were trying to proactively share information because we saw these bottlenecks starting to come up and making decisions that were affecting our providers. And all of this manifested into things that came out in the news. So when providers were not getting paid, our group had been trying to line up the budgets that help free up the money so providers can get paid. So there were a lot of things that we were trying to push forward. And this is where the small voices come in. We were frustrated, very frustrated in that moment because we felt that, leadership was not being responsive. There were things that were very questionable that were happening and no one was sort of witnessing. And folks were just, we were hemorrhaging people and we needed help. And that goes with so many other things. And so I know a lot of us had reached out to our unions to ask for help, had reached out to, some folks have been reaching out to media groups like New York Times, the Daily News, to try and elevate what was happening, to really try and be proactive. We knew this was all going to kind of blow up and nothing came of it for a very long time. So fast forward several months, maybe even a year, so many people caught in limbo in the meantime, but there was no one. If it's not in the news, people don't know about it. No one cares about it. And it's so like an uproar, that activates people. That's ultimately what happened. And so in that craziness, our team went from like 16 people to less, maybe like 7, 8 by the time that I left. I ultimately decided, despite loving working in city government, for the story and like the context and everything that I shared with you, I felt like I had to leave. So in September of 2022, I left. And I still felt this connection, and I still do to this day, to be completely honest, with all the people who work in city government. And I felt so bad for those who stayed behind. And there was so much just frustration and, a lot of frustration, and I think a loss of respect and dignity for those that stayed behind, because we felt like we knew what the challenges were. Like, people were not appreciating our expertise. If you were not connected to someone, if you were not a voice at that table, things were not being raised. So I just think there's a lot of frustration, and people still are to this day frustrated and maybe disappointed with how things panned out. And that's sort of what led to me starting this podcast. And truth be told, working in the city, I felt like, I couldn't bite the hand that fed me. So I couldn't do this while I was still working in city government, because you're worried, right? Will it affect your job? Will it affect your growth opportunities? Despite your best intentions and trying to do the right thing, we know that people can sometimes be penalized, right? For speaking truth, right, into the universe, because it might make people uncomfortable and make people look bad. So me leaving kind of freed me up to start this platform in this space to share, right, like why it's important to listen to people who work in city government. And part of it too, I think, in the years that I've worked in this space, I think a lot of people have this sense that city workers are lazy, that they're jaded, that they're not helpful. And you do have that, but I do believe at its core that a lot of people came into this, most people, with the intention of doing a good job, but there's so much to how you work in a day-to-day, to how you're resourced, to how you're cultivated and have opportunities to grow or move, right? That really maybe makes people that way, and we don't acknowledge it enough. And so having a platform to allow people to understand that people are not that way, or that there's factors and circumstances that maybe, affect the systems that they work in, and the product and the services that they offer and the outcomes. And they just don't know that because, they don't have time to get on New York One to talk to, right, Errol Lewis, or to get on ABC, or to get interviewed, or if, they do put in tips, they're not the stories that make these, make headlines or get put in newspapers or interviews and such. So that, I think, is the intention behind it, of like trying to let people understand what it's like to work in city government, to allow people to have a platform to air their concerns, their passion, and their beliefs, because, these folks really do represent conversations that we have. Like, I have a series like around the water cooler. We'd have conversations about politics and things that were happening, and things like, we really wish it was like this. But if you're not in decision-making capacity, you just your voice was not elevated, your perspective was not heard. And, that was a real void. It still is, I think. And so in my own little way, I try to, when things come up, we have state of the city addresses, and someone says, oh, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We kind of give you a play-by-play of like what that actually means behind the scenes, if it's feasible for those who work in government, what that, how it might pan out, or things people need to consider, or policies or shifts and things that are happening. So we do kind of like spotlights for people to hear about the journeys that led them into public service, but also doing reactions to policies, things that are happening, the politics, and sort of like the things that people don't think about, trying to call that out based on our experiences, our perspectives, our struggles, and our lessons, right? These are all things that we feel, if people heard us, it's difficult. I know small voices sometimes can get drowned out, but if you start to just pull out the larger themes and those threads, and you talked to Jean about threads, there's lots of threads that you could pull out from people, right? That know how they can make systems run better, how they can improve services for people, all that, but we just don't take the time to listen or ask. And so that's the goal of the podcast, to try and elevate that as much as possible.
First of all, thank you for creating a platform for these small voices. I heard, it can be very frustrating, right? When you've got a lot to say. And it's interesting, we brought up children too. And I know that by small voices, we're not talking about children, but it's all, can be all lumped together.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, right? I'm curious. And Cathey, I'd love to actually start off with you. You, Cathey, have a big voice, right? I like to say that you have a big voice, and I know your presence in Portland. You have a big voice and a big impact. Not everybody has the impact that you have, and not everybody can, get in front of major corporations and, major city figures. I mean, you've talked about the mayors and the real mayors of Portland, right? For those people who don't have that big voice, Cathey, how do you, or rather, what is the advice that you have for the small voices to be heard?
I'm so glad you asked me that. I was like, somebody asked me this. It's the thing that I love about my job the most right now. When I'm really good at marketing. So Liz, I started my original, like back way back in the day, was I started with I have base in psychology, and then I did marketing, wrote a marketing book, was speaking on the marketing book. But when I actually got into speaking myself, and then speaker coaching, and then TED coaching, my heart, to be able to help somebody that maybe didn't have the platform. And y'all, that's what TED is all about. TED, like it says on their website, we want to give a platform to great ideas to people, especially that might not have platforms already. So it's kind of already built into the mission. I love when I can help elevate somebody else's idea, because I can help them, create the message a little bit better, tell the story better, get on bigger and better stages, the whole thing. I really love that. Liz, the thing I was worried about when I was listening to you talk is I heard the whole thing of like, I didn't want to do this when I still worked there. I was thinking about some of the people that you might have on your podcast. Are they going to be in jeopardy? Are they going to be afraid to really speak out because of where they're at right now? And are you planning to anonymize that at all? Or like, what is your thoughts in that area? Because that made me think about that.
It's a great question.
That's do outreach to people. That is the greatest obstacle of getting folks to be on. It's crazy and it's sad to say, but some people have even felt like, oh, even if I anonymize and myself and don't share my name, will they be able to trace through my voice? Like that level of anxiety and concern. And I totally get it. Because yeah, sort of public's sharing your truth and experience. Sometimes people, you have people in any field and sector that they might blow whistles, and then they're just blowing whistles because they want to like throw a parade and get attention. I get that. But in some instances, in a lot of instances, I'm sure there's truth to it. And communicating that can be, a recipe for you to get put in the basement with your stapler, for those of you who are like Office Space fans, right? So a lot of people... as a big fear. And we, particularly in my department, we had a lot of young people who were very ambitious, they're young coming into the workforce, maybe want to have promotional and growth opportunities. So you just, you keep yourself protected and safe. And we do have people, I'm trying to think if we've had anyone on with using their real name. To be honest, I think everyone has come on with a pseudonym. Like anyone who we've spoken to, they have not used their real names just because, there's a concern there. But some people have really said they just would love to be on and to share their story and to share their perspective, but they just feel concerned that somehow to be able to be traced back to them, and they feel reluctant to join. And, I think...
So can we talk about that?
Yeah,
I feel like that might be the heart of what this conversation could be, is like, how, because now I don't feel like if you get people on your podcast, I don't know how much you're really representing, just because, you know what I'm saying? Like, so let's break that. Let's figure that out. Like, Mark, what do you think? One thing that I've noticed, I started watching this show, Mr. Robot. Yeah, Mr. Robot, right? Have you guys seen it?
iRobot?
Yeah.
No, Mr. Robot. It's a show. But you know what I'm talking about, Liz?
Yes, the hacker, I think.
I don't.
It has the actor Rami Malek in it, and anyway, it's really good because it's basically about the group Anonymous, but they fictionalize it. And when I was watching it, I'm only a couple episodes in. When I was watching it, I was like, movies and TV shows and even songs, most entertainment does a really good job. If you take a look at any of forms of entertainment over the years and decades, they do a good job of addressing hard things in an indirect way. like a really good job of it. Like they'll make it a satire, and then all of a sudden, Animal Farm, Karen talks about that a lot, right? Like it's and so I wonder if there's another layer you can do beyond like a pseudonym that could help allow somebody to speak freely, but it would put another layer of protection, but it would allow for more voices and more, like maybe it's getting to the heart of the problem, and maybe it isn't really about the agency. I don't know. I'm brainstorming.
Ooh, that's interesting when you said at the heart of the problem. I'm a firm believer that there's this invisible thread, there's an underlying issue, a human value issue that's really going on, that at the end of the day, I'm not really talking about the person, I'm not really talking about the government official, but I am talking about something that we as a society or as a humanity that I believe we should value. And so I'm wondering, how do we get the conversation about, how do we direct those types of conversations around values?
Yeah.
That's what's coming up for me.
Or
Not people,
ideas.
right, or ideas, right?
The countermeasure to the things that they might be dealing with, so that they don't maybe have to talk so specifically about the issues that they're dealing with, which could reveal who they are. But it's like maybe you can have some kind of undertone of if like, because of the work that you're doing, if you could make the world a better place, what would be that thing you would want to change or contribute? I don't know, something like that.
I mean, we try, so I think part of also being in this modern era of a lot of podcasts and a lot of YouTube shows, and there's a lot of content, right? A lot of people out there. One sort of conscious decision that I made is that I didn't want it to be sort of like a smack talking space, right? Like we can all be critics. My son is he's 12 years old, is around a lot of YouTube. And I say to him, it's easy to be a YouTube critic, right? Everybody wants to make critiques. That's easy. It's easy to call out the problems and to criticize things. But like, what are the solutions? How are you going to make things better? So that has been sort of a value of the podcast from the beginning. Like we're not trash talking, because that's easy to do. It's to, sort of really speak very commonsensical things, like bring those to light, but really state them, because those are not the aspects of the conversation that come up. Again, when you're in interviews with public officials, those are not the things that they're prioritizing. They're not the challenges that they're elevating. So like really trying to make our conversations of substance, because I think that has been also kind of a lean as of late. And to your point, Mark, like I think it's also it's also a challenge in this modern day. So it's like, and you too, Cathey, it's also like anonymizing yourself, but I also think it's become so challenging to be yourself in a public space, right? So I have this value system. This is my upbringing, but it doesn't align with yours. I think that comes up a lot in like 2025 New York City, of you have people with conflicting values that, really it's all coming to a head, and it creates like in personal conversations and interpersonal conversations, and particularly in city government and folks who live in New York City and are affected by change in leadership, there are a lot of value differences. And I think there's also this reluctance and this fear that what you say will also be judged, not also by your employer, but by your peers, by your family, and by the public, right? So I also think that's also an underlying tone, this fear of this cancel culture. If I say something, and don't get me wrong, there's moments where I'm like, in me hosting this and me being genuine and sharing my beliefs and my values and, my thoughts, is that going to come back to bite me in some moment? Even my mom, she's like, Liz, we have this new leadership at the federal level. I'm afraid for you to do this. If you say something, I know you're very passionate about this, but you have to be careful. I don't want you to lose your job. I don't want someone to like come after you. Like, and that's extreme. Like, who cares about me? But you never know, right? Where something may lead, right? So one thing can go viral. You never know. But that's a fear. So I think it's like one, kind of anonymizing yourself for your employer and the individuals who empower. But I also think just in this moment in time, there is a lot of anxiety around this cancel culture, and it's something that I say going to rub someone the wrong way, be misconstrued, and like affect my life, right? And some people out there, they're horrible. Like they want to go after your whole life if they don't agree with you about something. So I think it's that too.
Liz, I have an important question for you. Sorry, Mark. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I have a question that I think is going to be really important because I started thinking about it when she was talking. Is the goal of this podcast, do you really want to do this for them or do you want to do it for the audience? Meaning, are you giving them a voice as a like way to just say, hey, I want to talk about something that feels really important to me? Because I think the way that you would position this will be different if that's the case, right?
Yeah.
But if you're really doing it because you want to make some kind of impact on the people listening to this person, it's different. So I think maybe being really clear on that, if you haven't already been really, I haven't, and Liz, Mark and I could tell you, like, it took us a long time to be very crystal clear when we started our web show on exactly what we wanted to do. Like, we thought it was going to be one thing, and it ended up being a whole nother thing. And Mark, I would love for you to talk about our friend, and we'll anonymize our friend, but we have a friend that's in the entertainment business, and he works with high level people that are very, very public, and he works in a very toxic environment, and he is so positive. He does such a good job of staying positive in such a hard industry where people are like getting cancer left and right, and he's in sports, and so if that helps you out, Mark. I'm like, Mark,
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so and like, so when she was talking, I was thinking about him and just how hard, how many challenges, he had to deal with, but he has shown up over and over as in his values, and because of it, he's like written a book and he's doing really well, and I think he makes a big impact with his voice that started off started off small.
Thank you for bringing that up, Cathey, because I think what he does really well is, even though he's got access, and I'm sure stories upon stories upon stories about some well-known names, when he speaks, he's speaking from firsthand experience, right? So this is not an issue that I have with Mayor Rodriguez-Perez, right? That's not, I'm not here to talk about Mayor Rodriguez-Perez, right? What I am here to talk about is, it's been really difficult speaking up in my workspace, because I feel that if I say something, there's going to be a retaliation. And maybe that's really around, my own fears, right? And so what I'm looking for, and anybody who might feel like me, what I'm looking for are ways that I can express myself without that fear. And I think when I say that out loud, to Cathey's point earlier, I think if I take that perspective, it's less about who and pointing fingers, and more about what am I trying to figure out for myself and for anybody else like me. That's what comes to mind when I hear that, Cathey.
Yeah. I mean, Liz, I feel like you have this great opportunity to do a great value to the person that's on your show. And if you could pull something very positive, I love that you're like, this is like a no smack talk zone. Like, I love that. And I think it's a value. And then of somebody listening, if they know that this person is in a frustrating situation, but they're not naming, they're not naming it specifically, but they're like, hey, look, this is what I learned from it. And this is the value, this is the value that I hold true even in my work. I feel like that could be really valuable for them, but and also valuable for the people listening.
If you don't mind, I'd actually like to take a left turn on this for a moment. Liz, the platform you provide for people, whether they feel comfortable or not, to say who they are or not, right? It's really important because you're giving these small voices a voice. Mm-hmm. For those people who don't take the opportunity or don't have the opportunity to go on a podcast and speak their truth. How else can a small voice be heard in a public space?
That's a good question.
It's a great question. And I'm not sure, to be honest, because I think in our current climate, and I don't know how you all have experienced this. Certainly, Portland may be different than New York City, Cathey. But in New York City, I've had issues where personally for myself, I had an issue where my son's after-school program funding got cut. And for me, if I was not on a podcast, right, and having a public voice, for me, it would be I go to my city council member, I go to my community board, I go to, the folks who represent me to try and get help. And I'll say from a personal experience, I did that and it didn't get me anything. I got a stock answer of, this is open to a competition or we didn't have enough funding. And so, then that kind of, it addresses it, but it doesn't address it, right? So the problem is still there for me. I don't feel like I was heard. There's no follow-up. It's possible that after so many people contact these offices and or write emails and letters that there starts to be a bigger conversation. So it's I think that's the entry point for some people, but I do think that's where I think this small voice conversation comes up. And I think it's particularly relevant at the federal level, right? You have a lot of folks who we elect these representatives, but they may not represent you, or they may start initially when they come into positions to represent you. And that changes as, other interests dominate their decision-making process, right? Or political influences may impact their decisions and what they're able to do and can do. So I think there's a lot of frustration just from people. Like, there's power in small numbers, but I think a lot of people are expressing their frustrations and things don't change. People are not changing their course of action and how they operate, right? I think that's coming up at the federal level. And then whatever side you're on over the past several years, you could be feeling that way. But I think that's the struggle, right? Like I may really feel like this. And I know 20 of my friends or colleagues or family members who feel the same way. And we're saying this shouldn't be like this. There might, we have to, we need to operate differently, or we need to, make different decisions, or I'm against people being laid off. I'm against defunding certain things. Like there's just, you can say that as much as you want, as loud as you want, but it's not going to make a difference at the end of the day. So I think, it's a work in progress. It's sad because I feel like we have access to so much information and to so many platforms. But it's also like you can have that conversation. So we do have this platform and someone can share their story and share their insights and their knowledge and, things that they really believe in. But is it going to get to the right ears? Is the message going to land and be amplified? So, it's an attempt to do it, but just because they're not on a podcast, or even if they're on the podcast, to be honest, does it mean that someone's going to hear it? There's so much content and so much information and it's like kind of overloaded sometimes, but we do our best, right? It's just the sense of like, I'm like, hey, if something happens and one day someone runs across this and is like, oh, there's this chronicled sort of podcast that exists from 10 years ago that has some, really cool insights about city government, or, someone has a child and like, oh, I got interviewed on this and you can listen to it here. People share with their families and are really proud. So it's small scale sometimes, but I still think it makes a big difference to the people who are sharing their stories and, hoping that someone will hear their right, their
That's
small
what I was
voice in
curious
some way.
about. I was curious about the small win for the small voice. When somebody comes on your podcast or any other podcast like it, and I don't know how much detail you can go into, but like, what's an example of a small win after somebody has had a conversation on your show?
That's a good question. That's a great question.
So a couple of things, and it's civil conversations. I don't know if I've even said that. Look at that, Cathey, marketing. I need coaching. I need training. Civil conversations designed to elevate civil servant voices, right? That's the podcast. Small wins. We've had people email. So when I first started this, you all know, and anyone who has podcasts or YouTube shows, it's a lot of work and a lot of energy that goes into it. And, we may not have 1,000 plays, millions of plays. So that can be kind of deflating, right? And you'll question whether you're going to keep on going. So when I first started this, it was a matter of like, publicizing it, boosting it, trying to get people to listen. And actually, to your point of like reaching broader audiences, someone, I don't know how they found it, but they did at a different agency, someone I'd never worked with, agency I've never worked at, and happened to hear, the podcast and reached out and said, I listened to your episode of, I interviewed my dad, was one of the first episodes I did. He's like, I loved hearing your dad's story. I also work at this agency, and it was great to hear sort of like his experience, and, would love to connect with you to just, hear about how this came to be. And we just had a personal conversation. He was not comfortable with being on the show, but I still wanted to connect with him and kind of, validate what he was going through and just kind of commiserate in that where New York City was at that time. So that was just a personal conversation and a connection that I made of someone who I never would have spoken to. And we've also had instances where people will listen to the episodes that have like a talking the beat instead of walking the beat, where I interview someone who's a police officer. There's a lot to that career and that profession that when, we're at a party, I hear all these things like, wow, no one thinks about, and I get it. You're not in that role. You're not in that position. And there's a lot of frustration, legitimate frustration. And he'll admittingly say, like, I get it, but we're all humans, and there's good teachers, there's bad teachers, there's good cops, there's bad cops. There's like, that in every realm and walk of life. But hearing him talk about it was also sort of an inspiration for me, because I had friends who were in sanitation, who were in police department, fire department. There's so many things that you would just learn and be like, wow, so taken aback by their experiences. But that talking the beat, I've had multiple people reach out to me, and they're, wow, like I never thought of things this way. So to give you an example, in that conversation, we said, and I'm thinking about this also as a person who at that time was maybe considering getting a new job and questioning like my profession, or maybe, I had a bad day at work. And then he's like, yeah, you have someone who tells you to, beep, beep, beep. And I don't have to deal with that at work. Talk about a hostile work environment. You're potentially taking away people's freedom. You're dealing with difficult characters at times. Like we have someone in our circle who goes after people who have these high profile warrants. You're talking about people who've had dozens of offenses. So I'm like, okay, as a spouse to that person, having them go out the door and not being sure if they're going to come home safe. Or, I watch these shows. Speaking of shows and entertainment, I love true crime shows. I love documentaries. I love all those things. And I forget what I was watching recently. And it was like, they were storming into a building. And I'm like, can you imagine what it is to be a SWAT person going into a building? And like, you see it in a show and you're like, that blew up, but you don't understand what that means. In real life, that's somebody's life, right? That's somebody's family. We saw that happen with the shooting last week. So in a movie, that comes across as a way, but when that's real life, those things happen in real life. So what does it mean to be a police officer? What does it mean to, interestingly enough, I've met people who are firefighters and they're like, we love fires. And I would be terrified. I'm like, that would be the last thing I want to do is go into a fire. People who are firefighters, like, they're like, yeah, we don't like doing these, stupid inspections and permits. And that's the work that they don't like doing, the administrative, but they like fires. And those are the things you only know
to happen, but when they do happen, we like to put
it's like that's the work that they signed up for, right? So they feel like that's when their heroic powers are activated. And yes, you don't want to have a fire happen, but it's just that's when they feel like they're able to do the work that they're intended to do, right? The purpose, the why they're there is activated as opposed to the things they have to do. So lots of interesting stories. So I've been exposed to all of this just through doing that podcast, through doing the podcast and meeting these people. It's just like sort of sharing information, getting people to think about things in a different way. And I hope to continue to do that in other capacities, because I'm realizing more and more, to your point of like the show may evolve over time. I've been thinking about sort of converting it into, others. Like my sister was in the medical profession. She wound up stepping away post-COVID. There's a lot of people in hospitals. For those tracing back to The Pit, if you watch The Pit, you're like, whoa, that show has been, received a lot of accolades, but also there's a lot of activism and advocacy that's come from that show, because Noah Wiley, his mom was a nurse or has been a nurse for 50 years. So he's used the sort of notoriety of that show to advocate for policy changes and bills at the federal level. Those are things that people don't hear. But when I see that, me as this former civil servant, I'm like, yeah, Noah Wiley, thank you so much, for advocating for nurses. And we need that in government. So I do think there is an opportunity to really look at people's jobs. Actually spoke to someone last week who was an Uber driver, had done livery services like car driving for decades. Uber came in and he had to shift professions, had been doing this for decades. Reason being, he's like, I went from White Plains to pick up someone to take them to LaGuardia. And at the end of the day, when Uber processed my transaction, he made like $25 from that fare, but that does not cover his gas. That does not cover his tolls. So he's like, I'm at this point working for free, sometimes in the red, right? So those are all things that come up in a day to day that people, Uber, and Uber is advocating. And it's not to knock it, it's an incredible service, but there's people on the other side of all those policies and all of these systems. And those are stories that we don't hear. And I feel like we need to have like a really, back to your point, Mark, like this society that's deeply rooted in integrity and in values that help others, right? It's not just about greed. It's not just about power. It's not about influence. Just take care of people, do good by people, and we'll have a good society. We're very far removed from that. And I feel like if we did more of this elevating of small voices, it'll just open up people's minds a little bit more. I think we've become too closed into what we believe in and what we think is true. Like there's always a different way of looking at things.
Oh, Mark, go ahead. We might be thinking the same thing.
I love when he does that. I'm like, I got that out of Marc Williams. I'm so excited.
I'm wondering if the word is not elevating, but it's expanding. Because when I heard you share what you shared, a magic in small voices is that sometimes small voices feel alone. And when you talked about, when somebody hears or when somebody speaks on your podcast, and there's somebody out there who listens to it and says, I can relate to that, right? Or even if you think about advocacy, it's hard to advocate on my own and be the solo voice. But if I show up on your show on Civil Conversations, well, then maybe somehow another small voice will hear my small voice and we can pull these voices together. I think there's something very powerful about your opportunity to connect small voices to increase their volume. That's what was on my mind, Cathey.
I love that. It was a little bit of what I was thinking when you said expand. I thought you were heading right to where I was thinking. I do really love that. And I think, Liz, this is like, again, when Mark and I first really started, we even intentionally called it a web show because we did it during 2020 and we don't intend for it to be a podcast. We wanted people to watch it. Like we wanted it to be a video thing. So we called it a web show. That's a made up word. I made that word up. And in fact, every time we try to type it, it tells us it's not right. I also was thinking perspectives because I started listening to some of the things you were saying and I was like, well, I can agree with sometimes there might be something that you're frustrated about, that it's not smack talk, but you want to shine a light on, like, look, this is happening. This is not fair. This is hard. The voice is not being heard. So then I was like, yeah, I get that. You can't just have people come on all the time and be like, all right, well, what's positive about that? And like, that's not positive. I get it. There, you can be in this space where it's just real. And then it made me just think about perspectives. Like, for instance, when you're talking about like the perspective of a SWAT team member or a police officer, or maybe somebody that works at a school. I remember the company they used to work for, we were on a bunch of TV shows, including David Letterman, and we were almost on Dirty Jobs. And one of the things I love from the old show Dirty Jobs is they would show you these jobs that you have no idea that people are doing this stuff. Like, and it was all kinds of jobs. And you were always like, wow. And of course, a lot of it was gross. That's why it was called Dirty Jobs. And so you're like, wow, I did not know it was that bad. And then it reminds me of the show How Things Are Made. Remember that show? Like, you're like, oh, I had no idea that's how you make a Kit Kat bar or something like that. And so I also started thinking a really fun way to look at this could be its perspective. And if you asked the small voice, if you will, if you ask them, what's your perspective from the vantage point that you're sitting at, is so valuable because nobody's sitting exactly where you are. Nobody. There could be people that are in similar, but like the person that you have on your show, who they are, what their experience was, and how they got that job, and exactly what they're doing will never be replicated. It's like DNA, or it's like a fingerprint. So maybe it's their perspective. And that's what I was getting at. And that kind of matches too, Mark, with the expansion.
Well, now I'm going to take it even further.
We're expanding even more.
You know what, Liz, as somebody who has done work with the city of New York, as somebody who's a parent of children who go to this New York City public school system, I could right now talk to you about some of the frustrations that we have experienced in my own family. And I can see, to your point, how hard it might be for me right now to start naming names and naming offices and naming specifics. So I will fast forward past the specifics of the story and tell you that as frustrating as this situation was, the solution ended up being not one voice speaking up about it. Not one voice speaking up about it. But a couple of voices were invited to a panel discussion, a virtual panel discussion. And yes, there was some airing of frustrations, but ultimately, there were some ideas that were shared. And what I will say, speaking personally, without naming names.
I love this game. It's so fun.
Right? I remember my wife being on that call and sharing an idea that she had that ended up being implemented.
Oh, yes.
But I don't think her single voice would have been enough. And quite honestly, she didn't even know about the panel. I found out about the panel and I was like, oh, listen, I don't know if I can invite you, but here's the link.
I don't know if this is allowed, but
And it was this, I'm going to use this word, this conglomeration of small voices that I think ultimately made a difference. So I go back to this expanding, this expansion, this connection, and how you are helping small voices to find other small voices so that they can be heard.
yeah,
Mm.
I like that. And again, it's perspective too, though, right? Like Lauren had a perspective, and so did a couple of. Oh yeah, that's right.
I'm just kidding.
Who is that? I misspoke. Sorry. No, we're not naming names. There was a voice that you are related to, and there were other voices. No, but right, there's just having a couple of the voices and having similar perspective sounds like it made a difference, which is awesome. And I think, Liz, there's another thing I just want to tell you that's just coming, it's just like hitting my heart a little bit too. I've watched like, news stories and things happening. I'm not going to be specific about it either, because we don't need to get into like celebrity and drama and all this stuff, right? But I even watch things where it's like a really important person and it feels like their voice is getting swept under the rug, And so I think anytime anybody has opposing views to anything in life, there's always going to be this kind of like war to like shut the other voices up, distract them, or do whatever. And one of the things that I'm really loving about what you're doing is, at the end of the day, you don't have to worry about any of that. Honestly, you show up with your heart and you do the thing that you feel like you can do well, and you lift the voice up in the best way that you can, and let the universe take care of the rest. Right? Like, let it go. And something big might happen that you could never even imagine. But I feel like if you're just going with your heart and you're trying to do that, the rest is not up to you. It's like the universe will do its thing.
Cathey, thank you for saying that.
Mm.
I'm not in Liz's shoes doing this podcast, but I felt a sense of relief that by inviting a small voice to have a civic conversation, I don't have the pressure of changing the world in one conversation, or on at least a grand scale. My role is to give another small voice a
Exactly.
platform to
Yes.
speak.
Yes.
That's powerful. And I said thank you to Cathey. But Liz, I have to say thank
Yeah.
you to you,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
not me.
You recognize in this press paranoid world, as I like to call it, in this world where we're afraid of retaliation, people do have something to say. And if I don't shout it out and go on a platform in front of the park and, you know, air out all my dirty laundry, is there some place I can go? And you are creating that space where people can go. And I can only imagine people really appreciate it. And for those who are a little nervous about doing it because they're afraid of any kind of ramifications, what I could only hope for them is that they find some other space or some other person or some other platform so that they're not keeping it inside, right? I think at the end of the day, the medicine for the small voice is not to hide the voice, it's to give the voice a place where it can where it can speak up, even if it's only heard by one other person. So thank you, Liz, for doing that.
Yeah.
Continue to have that sort of a exponential impact, right? We all got to look out for each other, and good things, good people need to look out for good people, and good messages need to be spread. So I appreciate you having me on.
Mm.
I just want to share one more little thing because I think this might help too. And this is just to pile back onto this. Liz, there was like, in my world, everything is about my business. I have my family and a lot of my brand, my personal brand has become so blended. People like know me, especially in Portland, people like know me as being the adventurous person that's taking people to waterfalls and doing storytelling lessons at waterfalls and stuff like that. And it's cool. I love that some of that is blending. But of course, for many, many years, I kept a lot of the pains and traumas of things that happened in my life over here. And I finally decided this year, I had been writing this outline of this book, Heartbroken but Happy, for 4 years. And finally this year on Mother's Day, I decided to start writing the book, like writing it. I quickly wrote like 4 or 5 chapters and I was reading it to my family. And then I debated if I wanted to anonymize it because I'm like, I have a bunch of books out there. I don't want to like confuse people with my brand. And then I thought about this, and this is where I think this is the heart of what Mark and I are saying about you. I thought, if I'm not brave enough to talk about some of the things here and put my name to it and tell people, like, look, it's okay. This also happened to me. Other people are sitting behind, sitting in their isolated spaces, feeling very heartbroken and not feeling that pain of not wanting to share it with other people as well. So I think you're also offering a great, and everybody doesn't have to take you up on it either. That's another thing, right? But for the right person at the right place in the right time, I think what you're doing is awesome. And I think it's just a really great opportunity for a voice to be heard. And however, maybe they want it. Maybe that's how you ask them. What would you want to be heard? What is that thing that you would want people to hear?
Mm.
It's sort of my pursuit of, I've been searching my soul over the past couple of years, right? I think COVID and switching positions and life and everything that's been going on has kind of triggered this sort of clarifying time in my life where I'm like, okay, I've done the jobs. Is this what I want to do? I have the kids, what's next? Like kind of really, really evaluating. And I signed up for masterclass, and it's not to make a plug per se of like getting a subscription, but it's like one of the things that I did to sort of hear different perspectives, views, learn from the masters on a variety of things. And Robin Roberts has a phenomenal, her lesson was great in so many aspects, but one thing that she said is you should make your mess your message. And that's what that makes me think of, Cathey. And it's sort of like, you never know. You may think it's sort of like a downtime or something you want to keep private, and understandably so, but your mess, you know, this experience that you had could connect with someone, like you said, Mark, right? And make them feel validated, make them feel like they're not alone, make them feel courageous to also share their stories. Like I've read a couple Brene Brown books. A lot of her, right, also comes like this dare to lead, dare to be vulnerable, dare to share these aspects of your life. So I applaud you for doing that. And yeah, it's scary nowadays, again, cancel culture, all the things that you said, Mark, right? Of like the super paranoia. It's hard to be vulnerable. We're all supposed to have this aura, and this in Spanish, you say this don that your life is perfect, right? For Facebook and for Instagram. And I travel into all these things. Some people really sell their vulnerability and their struggles, but a lot of people are selling the good sides of their life and keep all this bottled up. So I think the like make your message, lean into that vulnerability. I think it will probably, I know it's kind of hard to weave those brands and those parts of your personality together and your life together, but I feel like those really connect with people because like you said, it's something you can relate to, something you'll identify with, and you never know the effect it'll have on others. So kudos, and I can't wait to read it. So
Yeah. Well, kudos to you, Liz, because that's what I'm saying is that's what I started feeling this stuff in my heart, and it really started to make my heart well up for what you were doing. And I really, really love this. And I love
awesome.
this conversation, and I can't believe like it like went by so fast.
Always. I know,
Like, oh my
always.
God. My brain personally went into two different, areas. I'm gonna, Mark, I'm gonna start with you, and then I'll go next, and then I'll go to Liz, and then we'll ask Liz where she wants to be found or whatever. But what has went through your brain in the last hour, Mark, where what we talked about?
I think what's at the top of my brain is helping small voices to find other small voices. That's really at the top of my brain.
Yeah, I love
Sounds
that.
like a great mission.
I love that. What really is sticking with me too is being able to show a perspective that nobody would have ever even thought about. I think you said something like that, Liz, and that really made me think, yeah, I bet you every single person in a position that we might not know something about, they're like, we might think it's a certain way, and it absolutely is not. So that perspective shift and changing. And I think that's the best way to change people's minds, like, is to really show them something that they've never actually seen before. So, yeah. But Liz, how about you?
I mean, certainly just grateful, feel a sense of gratitude for being able to sort of just share my story and, my thought process and sort of one of my personal loves. I I think it's always like this balance. I'm one person where I try to always kind of like go by the book and seeking this perfection. I've held back on doing certain episodes or having different conversations and just talking to you all. Today is like one, like really trying to think about the message, like the audience, like clarifying things. I don't have to be married to something super rigid, but I already was like, I was starting to write notes. I was like, you know what, this is recorded. I can go back and listen. So certainly walking away with just speaking of perspectives, love, both of you come to the world with just um, amazing skills, amazing ways of like helping to dissect and pull apart my message and pull apart the things that I'm working on and the impact I can have. And so for me, really, it's just really expressing a major gratitude and a an appreciation for you kind of thinking about this work, and it's not just letting me speak about it, but also like, Liz, this could be great, and it's something I'll walk away from just playing this back to say, how can I change how I'm framing this? It's not elevating, it's expanding and bringing out perspectives. Like it's a great way to look at things outside of my own mind, right? And how I can continue to do this work and bring in others. So that's my big takeaway from today. And I
Oh,
love you both, and I'm so happy to be
I
here.
love you so much. Liz,
So,
thank you. You just,
of
this
course.
conversation has made me have so much, my heart is just, I feel so much for what you're doing, and I appreciate it. And I
Thank
especially
you.
love where it all came from, like the story about your dad. So thank you for sharing that. If people want to find out about the podcast and find you, where's the best place for them to go looking?
Yeah. So Civil Conversations is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. And if you wanted to reach out to me, you can send me an email, liz.civilconversations@gmail.com. But if you listen in, you can shoot me an email, comment. Would love to, connect with others, see if folks want to be on. Always have that invitation open. And yeah, if you know of anyone, please feel free to send them my way. Any
Yeah, please,
perspective enlightening folks? Yes, please
anybody
do.
watching from our show base, please, like, it would be awesome.
Yes.
I know there's
Yeah.
people out there that want their voice to be heard. So thank you. Liz,
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
for being on our show. I
Yeah.
know.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on our show. It's about to go down. This is we're telling everyone, it's our last season, so we're very excited that I know we're sad that it's kind of coming to an end, but very happy that you could be on our final season. So Liz, thank
Thank you
you.
so much for having me. Yes.
And to anybody watching, I just, I started thinking about it and I was like, you know what? That's it for today. But remember that, like, every moment, every idea is an opportunity to, to bring it downtown, right? Like what we do here, every idea, every voice out there, you have this opportunity to do that. And that's what we do here. So
Yeah.
we are grateful that you tuned in to another episode of It's About to Go Down.